The window didn't shatter. It detonated. Glass exploded inward like a gunshot, scattering across the floor as Laura was already moving. She didn't scream. She didn't hesitate. Her body reacted before her thoughts could catch up. "Down," she said. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Jean Park barely processed the word before the couch flipped violently onto its side, bullets tearing through the space where his head had been less than a second earlier. The sound was deafening, sharp cracks ripping through the walls. Laura dragged him by the collar, hard, pulling him across the floor as more shots followed. Jean hit the ground, heart hammering, ears ringing. "What the—" "Quiet," Laura snapped. Her voice was calm. That was the part that cut through the chaos. Calm in the middle of gunfire wasn't bravery. It was familiarity. Another shot hit the wall. Plaster burst. Laura counted silently. 1, 2, 3. She moved again. She shoved Jean toward the hallway just as the doorframe splintered under another impact. The safe house they had trusted less than 12 hours ago was already dying around them. "Before we go any further, can I ask you something? Where in the world are you watching from right now? Drop it in the comments. These stories travel farther than you think. And hit that subscribe button because what happens next turns survival into something much darker." Laura kicked the hallway door open and pushed Jean through. He stumbled, catching himself on the wall. "Who are these people?" he demanded, breath uneven. "They're not here for you," Laura said. "Move." Another explosion. The front door finally gave way. Voices flooded in. Controlled. Sharp. Not street thugs. Not drunk muscle. Jean heard it immediately. The discipline. The spacing. "They move like a unit," he said. Laura didn't look back. "I know." She reached the back exit, paused, listened. Her head tilted slightly, eyes unfocused. Jean realized she was counting footsteps again. Measuring distance. Timing. She opened the door. Cold night air hit them like a slap. The alley was narrow, poorly lit, damp from earlier rain. Bad visibility. Worse angles. Jin's instinct screamed trap. Laura pulled him close, low. "Stay behind me." "I don't take orders," Jean said automatically. She looked at him. Just a look. Jean shut his mouth. The first man appeared at the mouth of the alley. Laura moved. Not wild. Not rushed. A clean step forward. A sharp strike. The man dropped without a sound, crumpling before Jin's brain fully registered what had happened. Laura caught him, lowered him carefully to the ground. Already turning. The second man froze. That half-second of hesitation ended him. Jean felt his stomach tighten. Not fear. Something colder. She wasn't improvising. She was executing. They ran. They didn't stop until the city swallowed them. Neon lights. Traffic. Noise. Soul pretending nothing was wrong. They ducked into a stairwell, breath heavy now, adrenaline finally catching up. Laura leaned against the wall for half a second, eyes closed. Then she straightened again, composed. Jean stared at her. "You were trained," he said. No answer. "That wasn't desperation," he continued. "That was discipline." Laura wiped blood that wasn't hers from her knuckles. "Drop it." 5 men in a restaurant, Jean said quietly. Now a breach team. That's not coincidence. Laura turned away. "You want the truth?" she asked. "Because once I say it, you don't get to pretend this ends clean." Jean didn't hesitate. "I stopped pretending when bullets hit my wall." She exhaled slowly. "I didn't leave that life," she said. "I escaped it." The word hung between them. Escaped. "They don't forgive that," she continued. "They don't forget it either." Jean absorbed this in silence. His world had always been violent, but predictable. Territory. Loyalty. Betrayal you could see coming. This was different. "Then the restaurant," he said. "That was about you." "Yes." "And me." Laura met his eyes. Collateral. "If that just hit you the way it hit Jean Tap like right now. Because this story just crossed a line." They reached a borrowed apartment before dawn. Someone Jean trusted. Someone who owed him. Someone who wouldn't ask questions. Laura locked the door, checked the windows, then sat on the floor like her legs had finally remembered they were human. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Jin's phone buzzed. Once. Then again. His face changed as he read. "What?" Laura asked. "They leaked footage," he said. "Restaurant cameras. They're calling it an internal Mafia dispute. Power struggle." Laura laughed softly. "No more. Just understanding." "That means they're close," she said. "Who?" Jean asked. "Who trains someone like you and sends teams like that?" Laura leaned her head back against the wall. People who clean messes powerful men don't want traced. Jean swallowed. You were an asset. I was disposable, she corrected. Silence pressed in. Jean finally asked the question that had been circling his chest since the restaurant. Why help me? Laura didn't answer immediately. When she did, her voice was quieter. Because I know what it feels like to be marked. You could have kept running. I tried. Her jaw tightened. They burn everything you love when you do. That landed harder than any bullet. Jean looked at her differently now. Not as a liability. Not as a mystery. As a storm. If you were in Laura's place, what would you do? Run again? Or turn and face the people who made you? Tell me in the comments. Jean straightened. If they're coming, they won't stop. They never do. Then we stop hiding. Laura studied him. You don't bait predators unless you're ready to bleed. Jean gave a tired smile. I've been bleeding since the restaurant. A long beat. Then Laura nodded.
Fine, she said.
We make noise. And somewhere in the city, engines turned. Phones lit up. And the people hunting Laura Sam adjusted their plans. Because she wasn't running anymore. Before we continue, like this video if you're still with us, subscribe so you don't miss the next part, and tell me this. Do you think Laura is protecting Jean?
Or using him?
They didn't sleep. Laura sat on the floor with her back against the wall, knees drawn up, eyes open and alert. Jean watched her from across the room, the city's early light creeping in through the blinds like it was trying not to disturb them. You're not even tired, he said quietly. I am, Laura replied. I just don't let it win. Jean nodded, as if that explained everything. Maybe it did. His phone buzzed again. This time he didn't flinch. He already knew the rhythm. When the enemy finds your scent, they don't rush. They circle. They test. They wait for mistakes. He read the message, jaw tightening. They're moving my borders, he said. Taking pieces while I'm distracted. Laura looked up. That's not coincidence either. No, Jean said. That's pressure. She stood, slow and deliberate, as if she were stepping back into a version of herself she'd tried to bury. They want to see what you'll sacrifice to protect me. Jean let out a breath. They won't like the answer. Laura studied him. You're calmer than you should be. I grew up learning how to sit with fear, he replied. It doesn't scare me anymore. It just tells me where to aim. There it was. The reason he was still alive. The reason men followed him. Jean Park didn't rush violence. He prepared it. Laura crossed the room and stopped in front of him. Listen carefully. The people coming aren't like your rivals. They don't posture. They don't negotiate. They erase. Jean met her gaze. Then we make it messy. She paused. You're sure? He smiled faintly. You didn't save my life to watch me fold. That earned the smallest nod. Respect, not trust. Trust came later. If it came at all. Laura moved to the window, peeling the blind just enough to scan the street. They'll send eyes first. Not shooters. Watchers. As if summoned, a car rolled past slower than necessary. There, Jean said. Laura memorized it in a second.
Plate.
Driver. The way his head didn't turn. They know where we are, she said. They just don't know what we're doing. Jean straightened his jacket. Then let's tell them. Before we continue, let me ask you something real quick. Have you ever felt like the moment you stop running, everything catches up at once? Comment yes, if that's ever been you. And hit subscribe, because this is exactly where Laura's past refuses to stay buried. They didn't leave through the front. They split. Laura took the stairs down. Jean went up, through the roof, where his driver waited 2 buildings over. It was a risk. Separation always was. But Laura insisted. They expect us together, she said. Confuse the picture. Jean hesitated for half a second. Then he trusted her. Bad habit. Necessary one. Laura emerged onto the street dressed differently now. Hair tucked. Jacket swapped. She became invisible the way only people who had learned to survive could. She walked with purpose, not urgency, blending into morning commuters. The watcher's car followed. Good. She led them through narrow streets, past markets setting up for the day, into places cameras struggled to see. When she ducked into a subway entrance, she felt the shift immediately. The men behind her adjusted. Hunters. She smiled to herself. Meanwhile, Jean reached the car and slid into the back seat. Miho glanced at him through the mirror. You look like hell, Miho said. Drive, Jean replied. And call everyone. How bad is it? Jean stared out the window. Worse than we thought. Laura exited the train 3 stops early and moved fast now, weaving through bodies, doubling back, checking reflections.
She spotted them again. 2 this time.
They were adapting.
So did she.
She ducked into a public restroom, waited 10 seconds, then exited behind them, reversing roles. One of the men noticed too late. She didn't confront them. Not yet. She wanted them nervous. Across the city, Jean stood in a warehouse filled with men who looked to him for answers. His lieutenants argued. Territory maps glowed. Voices rose. Silence, Jean said. They obeyed. We're being tested, he continued. Not by rivals. By something colder. What do we do? Someone asked. Jin's eyes hardened. We stopped playing defense. Laura arrived at the warehouse as the room quieted. Every head turned. Curiosity. Suspicion. Calculation. She felt it. The weight of being the unknown variable. Jean met her halfway. You were followed. I know, she said. They wanted me to know. He gestured to the room. This is my world. Laura scanned the men. Then you should know mine just walked into it. A murmur rippled. She didn't raise her voice.
She didn't need to.
They won't hit you directly. They'll dismantle you.
Piece by piece.
Allies first. Reputation next. Then blood. One of the men scoffed. And you know this how? Laura looked at him. Because I used to be the piece. Silence. Jean watched as men reassess her in real time. This ends 2 ways, Laura continued. Either you cut me loose and pray they lose interest, or you let me help you set the trap. Jean didn't look away. And which one do you want? Laura held his gaze. I don't want to run anymore. That admission hung heavy. It wasn't brave. It was exhausted. Jean turned to his men. Clear the floor. They hesitated, then moved. Only Jean and Laura remained in the center of the warehouse. If we do this, Jean said, there's no return. Laura nodded. I know. Outside, the city kept moving, unaware it was about to become a battlefield for people who didn't miss. If you're still watching, like this video. If you want to see how this trap gets built, subscribe now. And tell me this in the comments. Do you think Laura is finally choosing herself, or just choosing a better war? Jean didn't waste time pretending this was still theoretical. Within an hour, the warehouse emptied except for the men he trusted with silence.
Phones were taken.
Doors sealed. Maps replaced arguments. Laura stood off to the side, arms folded, watching how Jean moved when pressure thickened the air. He didn't shout. He didn't posture. He listened, then cut straight through the noise. You're sure they won't hit here?
Miho asked. They won't yet, Laura said.
They want proof.
Patterns.
Confirmation. Confirmation of what? Another man snapped. That I'm not running, she replied. The room went quiet again. Jean turned to her. How do we give them that without handing them my people? Laura stepped closer to the table, tapped a spot near the river. We let them see me somewhere loud. Somewhere public. Somewhere they can't resist. Miho frowned. You're talking about bait. Yes. You, Jean said. Laura met his eyes. Me. A long beat. Jean didn't like it. He could feel that immediately. Leaders learned early to distrust plans that asked for one life in exchange for many. But Laura wasn't asking to be sacrificed. She was asking to stand where she could see the knife coming. They'll come fast, Jean said. And clean. They always do, Laura replied. That's the mistake. Before we go on, can I ask you something real quick? Have you ever been the person everyone expects to break first? Comment me, if that's ever been you. And hit like if you're still with us, because the pressure only climbs from here. They chose a riverside promenade just before sunset. Foot traffic heavy. Cameras everywhere. Music drifting from cafes. A place where violence would be messy and attention impossible to control. Laura changed clothes. Simple. Neutral. Nothing that screamed threat. When she stepped out of the car, no one looked twice. That was the point. Jean watched from across the street, phone pressed to his ear, voice low. Positions? Set, Miho replied. Eyes everywhere. Laura felt it before she saw it. The prickle between her shoulders. The way the air shifted when trained people entered a space pretending not to care. She kept walking. A couple passed her. Then another. Then a man with an earpiece stopped just a little too close. There. Laura slowed, turned toward the river rail, rested her hands like a tourist watching the water. In the reflection, she counted them. 3. Then 4. Then the 5th stepping wide.
She breathed in.
Steady. This was the line. The man with the earpiece spoke first, soft enough that only she could hear.
Laura some.
She didn't turn. Walk, he said.
Now.
Jin's voice crackled in her ear. Laura, we see them. I know, she murmured. Stay back. The man reached for her elbow. Laura moved. Not to strike. Not yet. She stepped sideways, broke contact, and said loudly, Don't touch me. Heads turned. Phones lifted. The man smiled thinly. You don't want to do this here. That's funny, Laura said. Neither do you. Tension snapped tight as wire. Another man closed in. Jin's hand clenched around his phone. Every instinct screamed to intervene, to pull her out, to burn the whole street down. Laura caught his eye across the crowd and shook her head once.
Wait.
The first man leaned closer. You belong to us. Laura finally faced him. Her voice dropped, calm and clear. I don't belong to anyone. That was when it broke. A hand grabbed her arm. Someone shouted. A body collided. The crowd surged back in a ripple of confusion. Laura used the momentum. She twisted free, spun, and planted her feet. A clean elbow drove into a chest. Not lethal. Disabling. Another man reached for her bag. She dropped it and stepped inside his space, fast and decisive. He went down hard, air gone in a sharp grunt.
Phones were recording now.
Too many. Sirens in the distance. Jin moved. His men flowed in from every angle, not weapons drawn, not obvious. Just bodies, barriers, confusion. They separated attackers from Laura, funneled the crowd away, broke the formation. The handlers realized too, late this wasn't chaos. It was choreography. One tried to pull back. Laura intercepted him at the rail. Listen, he hissed. You don't understand what you're starting. Laura leaned in close enough that only he could hear. I understand exactly. She let him go. That was the message. By the time the police arrived, the attackers had vanished.
Loyalties.
No clear story. Just footage of a woman who refused to be dragged away and men who suddenly didn't want the attention. Laura disappeared into the crowd as easily as she'd appeared. Minutes later, she was back in the car, breath steady, hands clean. Jin stared at her. You let them leave. Yes.
Why? Because now they know, she said.
I'm not afraid. And I'm not alone. If that choice surprised you, tell me why in the comments. And if you're still here, subscribe, because this is where consequences start stacking. That night, the city buzzed with rumors. Clips spread. The narrative fractured. No clean villain. No clear win. And somewhere far from the river, a phone rang. A man watched the footage once. Then again. He paused on Laura's face, rewound, slowed it down. So she's alive, he said. Yes, a voice replied. And she's made contact. Silence. Then a smile.
Good.
Prepare the second phase. Back in the warehouse, Jin closed the door behind them. You knew they'd escalate, he said. Laura nodded. They can't help it. And when they do? She met his gaze, tired but unflinching. Then we stop pretending this is a warning. Jin exhaled slowly. You're not just bait. No, Laura said. I'm the fuse. If you had to choose right now, would you cut the wire or light it? Like the video if you're still with us. Comment your choice. And stay subscribed. The city didn't sleep that night. Neither did Laura. She sat on the cold concrete floor of the warehouse, back against a pillar, the faint hum of generators filling the silence. Jin stood a few steps away, watching her the way people watch fire when they're not sure if it will keep them warm or burn the house down. You let them walk away, he said again. Laura didn't look up. I let them report back. That wasn't mercy. No, she flexed her fingers once. It was strategy. Jin rubbed his jaw. He hated half-answers. But something in her tone told him this wasn't a game of clever words. This was a map she'd already walked before. They won't hit you next, Laura continued. They'll hit around you. As if summoned by her words, Miho burst through the side door, phone pressed tight to his ear, face pale. They just torched one of our storage depots, he said. Empty, but public. Fire crews everywhere. Jin closed his eyes briefly. There it was. Pressure. They want you emotional, Laura said softly. They want you reckless. Jin opened his eyes. And what do you want? Laura stood, slow, deliberate. I want them predictable. Before we continue, can I ask you something? Have you ever felt someone pushing every button just to see when you'd finally break? Comment yes if that's ever been you. And hit like if you're still with us, because this is where the mind games get ugly. The next hit came 2 hours later. Not fire this time.
A leak.
False documents dumped online. Old alliances questioned. Names dragged through headlines before sunrise. Jean watched his empire fray in real time. They're not even trying to hide it, he muttered. They don't need to, Laura replied. They're testing a response time. Jean slammed his phone onto the table. Then let's respond.
No, Laura said.
That word stopped the room.
No.
Miho echoed. Laura turned to him. Not yet. Jean studied her face. You're asking me to absorb this. I'm asking you to stay alive long enough to win. The silence stretched. Finally, Jean nodded. It wasn't surrender. It was trust, thin and dangerous. Laura exhaled. Good. She moved toward the back room, one Jean hadn't noticed before. A small space.
No cameras. No windows. Sit, she said.
Jean hesitated, then did. Laura pulled something from her jacket. A folded photograph. Old. Creased at the edges. She didn't hand it to him. She placed it on the table between them. Jean leaned forward. A younger Laura stared back from the image. Harder eyes. Different posture. Beside her stood men he didn't recognize, but instinct screamed military. Or worse. This is why they can't let me disappear, Laura said. I know how they think, how they move, and how they clean. Jean swallowed. Why show me this now? Because once I say the next part, she replied, you'll understand why they're not stopping. She tapped the photo. I wasn't trained to fight gangs. I was trained to erase operations. Miho shifted uneasily. Jean looked up. Erase how? Laura's gaze hardened.
No witnesses. No patterns.
No survivors who could talk. The room felt colder. If that revelation just changed how you see Laura, let me know in the comments. And subscribe, because this story is no longer about one night in a restaurant. Jean leaned back slowly. So, this isn't about territory. No, Laura said. It's about containment. Another phone buzzed. This time it was Laura's. She stared at the screen longer than Jean liked. They found my name, she said. The real one. Miho's voice was tight. What does that mean? It means they're done testing. Outside, thunder rolled. Or maybe it was just traffic echoing through concrete. Jean stood. What's phase 2? Laura met his eyes. They'll send someone who knows me. Someone you trained with. Someone I survived. That landed heavy. Jean straightened his jacket. Then we prepare. Laura shook her head. No. We invite. Silence. Jean laughed once, sharp. You want to invite the devil into my house? I want him comfortable, she replied. Comfort makes people sloppy. Miho cursed under his breath. Laura grabbed her jacket. They'll reach out before dawn. When they do, you let me handle it. And if they demand you? Jean asked. Laura paused at the door. Then you decide how much my life is worth to you. That question stayed behind her long after she walked out. If you were Jean right now, what would you choose? Protect your empire. Or protect the woman who just became its biggest liability? Tell me in the comments. Like the video if you're still watching. Subscribe if you want to see how this negotiation turns dangerous. The call came just before dawn. Jean was already awake when the phone vibrated against the table. He didn't reach for it immediately. He watched it buzz, felt the weight of the decision Laura had left him with settle deeper into his chest. Miho was watching him. Everyone was. Jean picked up. Park, the voice said. Come. Familiar in a way that made the skin crawl. You've been busy. Jean didn't respond. We'd like to talk, the voice continued. And before you say no, understand this isn't a request. Laura stepped into the room silently and held out her hand. Jean hesitated for half a second, then passed her the phone. This is Laura, she said. Her voice was even, almost polite. A pause on the other end. A soft exhale. So you are alive. Laura closed her eyes briefly. You sound disappointed. Relieved, the man replied. It would have been inconvenient otherwise. Before we continue, can I ask you something? Have you ever heard a voice that reminded you of a past you fought to survive? Comment below if that resonates. And hit like if you're still with us, because this conversation changes everything. You've made things loud, the man said. Public. That was the point, Laura replied. Then let's stop dancing, he said. Tonight. Neutral ground. Jean leaned forward. She doesn't go anywhere alone. A chuckle. Of course she doesn't. Bring your men. Bring your fear. Just don't bring weapons. The line went dead. Miho swore. It's a trap. Yes, Laura said. But not for us. Jean studied her. You're sure? Laura met his gaze. This is how they confirm ownership. Face to face. They'll try to remind me who I was. And if it works?
It won't, she said.
Then, softer. But they'll try. Before we go further, tell me this in the comments. Do you believe people can truly escape who they were trained to be? They arrived at the location just after sunset. A private lounge overlooking the city. Glass walls. Too open. Too exposed. Laura liked it. The man was already there, seated comfortably, drink untouched. He looked older than she remembered. Not weaker. Just slower. Sit, he said, gesturing. Laura didn't. You always hated chairs, he observed. Still standing guard? I don't guard anymore, she replied. I choose. Jean watched the exchange carefully. Every word was a blade disguised as conversation. You caused a lot of trouble, the man continued. You broke contracts. Cost lives. Laura's jaw tightened. I didn't break anything. I walked away. That's the same thing to us. Jean stepped forward. Whatever your issue is with her, you don't solve it by destabilizing my territory. The man finally looked at Jean. Really looked. You're incidental, he said. The room went cold. Laura's eyes sharpened. Watch how you speak to him. The man smiled faintly. You've grown attached. Jean felt something shift. Not jealousy. Not fear. Resolve. We can end this clean, the man said. Laura comes back. We disappear. Laura laughed. Short. Sharp. You don't disappear. The man's smile faded. You think you can win? I know you can lose, Laura replied. Silence stretched. The man stood. Then let me remind you. Lights flickered. Somewhere below, engines roared to life. Laura turned to Jean. This is where it gets ugly. If your heart just dropped, you're not alone. Like this video if you're still watching because the cost is about to be paid. The first explosion hit one of Jin's outer operations less than a minute later. Not lethal. Symbolic. Message received. Jin's phone buzzed endlessly. Reports flooding in. Damage. Injuries. Panic. The man watched Jean carefully. You see? Pressure. Laura stepped closer. You're making a mistake. The man shook his head. You already did. Laura's voice dropped. You trained me to see patterns. And you're repeating one. The man hesitated. Just for a second. Laura leaned in. You came in person. Realization flickered across his face. You're not here to collect me, she continued. You're here because you're losing control. That was the crack. Jean saw it. The shift. The moment the hunter realized the prey had teeth. The man straightened. We'll see. He turned and walked out. Laura exhaled slowly. Now it starts. Outside, the city buzzed with sirens and smoke. Jean stood beside her, empire burning at the edges. You could still leave, he said quietly. Disappear. Let me deal with the fallout. Laura shook her head. They won't stop. And you won't survive this without knowing how they think. Jean looked at her. Then teach me. She met his eyes. That's the dangerous part. If you're still here, subscribe. And tell me in the comments. Would you have taken that deal or done exactly what Laura just did? Laura didn't sleep after the meeting. She stood alone on the balcony of the warehouse office, city lights flickering below like nothing was wrong. Jean watched her from inside, noticing how still she was. Not frozen. Anchored. When do they strike next? He asked. Laura didn't turn. They already have. As if on cue, Miho's phone rang. He answered, listened, then swore under his breath. They just hit a courier route. No des. But they let the drivers go. Laura nodded. They're spreading fear. Making your people doubt you. Jean clenched his jaw. They want me isolated. Yes, Laura said. And you want them overconfident. He walked out to join her. Then tell me what you'd do if you were them. She finally looked at him. I'd try to turn you against me. The words settled heavy. Before we continue, quick question. Have you ever felt like the person protecting you might be the reason you're in danger? Comment below. And hit like if you're still with us, because the tension is about to get personal. They'll leak something, Laura continued. A rumor. A lie. Maybe even the truth. Something that makes your people wonder if keeping me close is worth the cost. And if it works? Jean asked. Laura's voice was quiet. Then they won't need to touch you. You'll implode on your own. The first rumor hit before noon. A message circulated through Jin's network. Detailed. Claiming Laura wasn't just connected to the attacks, but orchestrating them. That she was manipulating Jean, using him as cover while she settled her own vendetta. Jean read it twice. Miho watched his face carefully. People are asking questions. Laura walked in as if summoned. Let me guess, she said. They're wondering if I'm worth the fire. Silence answered her. She nodded once. Good. That means it's working. Jean stared at her. Working for who? For us, she replied. They're pushing you to choose. We make them think you're about to. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. You need to look like you're losing patience with me. Miho frowned. You want him to threaten you? Laura shrugged. Publicly. Jean didn't like it. He didn't like any plan that required turning his people's trust into a weapon. But he understood leverage. Understood sacrifice. Fine, he said. But you don't disappear. Not really. Laura met his eyes. I never do. That afternoon, Jean summoned his lieutenants. Laura stood off to the side, deliberately distant. This situation is bleeding us, Jean said coldly. And she's at the center of it. Eyes shifted. Whispers rippled. Laura kept her face neutral.
Calm.
Like this was just another room she had to survive. She stays for now, Jean continued. But if this escalates further, I'll make a decision. The message landed exactly where it needed to. That night, Laura sat alone in a side room, lights low. She took a photo from her pocket. The same one she'd shown Jean earlier. She stared at it longer this time. Footsteps approached. Jean stopped in the doorway. They bought it. She nodded. They'll reach out soon. They'll think you're wavering. And if my men start wavering too? Laura's expression softened. Then you remind them why they follow you. Jean leaned against the frame. You're asking me to gamble everything. Laura looked up.
No.
I'm asking you to stop pretending this isn't already a war. The message came just after midnight. Not a call. Not a threat. Coordinates. Laura read them once, then deleted the message. They want me alone, she said. Jin's voice hardened. That's not happening. They'll expect you to refuse, Laura replied. Which is why you won't. Miho's eyes widened. You're sending her? Laura stood. I'm going. Jean stepped forward. You said you weren't disposable anymore. I'm not, she replied. I'm necessary. Before we go further, let me ask you something. If you were Jean, would you let her go or stop her by force? Comment your answer. Because this is the choice that changes everything. They arrived near the coordinates just before dawn. An unfinished high-rise overlooking the river. Exposed. Wind whipping through concrete skeletons. Laura exited the car alone. Jean watched her walk into the building without looking back. Minutes passed. Then a voice crackled through Jin's earpiece. Laura's.
Calm.
They're here. Jean tensed. How many? Enough. Inside, Laura moved through the shadows like memory.
She spotted them before they spoke.
3 figures.
Familiar stances. Familiar elegance.
You shouldn't have come, one said. Laura stepped into the light. You wouldn't have believed anything else. They circled her slowly. Not attacking. Measuring. You made us look weak, another said. You did that yourselves, she replied. A pause. Then the man she recognized most stepped forward. The one who'd trained her longest. You were always difficult, he said. But useful. Laura's hands clenched. I'm neither now. He smiled. We'll see. Outside, Jean listened, breath shallow, knowing this was the moment that defined whether he was leading or reacting. Inside the building, Laura raised her chin. You came to reclaim me. The man shook his head.
No.
We came to see if you were still ours. Laura's eyes hardened. And the man nodded toward the darkness behind her. Something moved. Laura reacted instantly, spinning, body already braced. Too late. A sharp sting hit her neck. Her vision blurred. Jean shouted into the calm Laura. Her voice came through, strained but defiant. They planned this. The world tilted. The last thing Laura saw was the man stepping closer, smiling. Lesson 1, he said softly. No one ever really leaves. If that moment just made your stomach drop, you're not alone. Like the video if you're still here. Subscribe and tell me in the comments. Do you think Laura anticipated this or finally underestimated them? Laura woke to darkness and pain. Not the sharp kind. The dull, spreading ache that told her exactly what had been used and how carefully it had been dosed. Her wrists were bound behind her back, ankles secured to a chair bolted into concrete. The air smelled like dust and old metal. Somewhere above, wind whistled through an unfinished floor. She breathed slowly.
Counted.
Listened.
Chains.
Footsteps. One heartbeat too steady to be nervous. So, a familiar voice said, "You're still with us." Her vision cleared enough to make out his silhouette. The man who had trained her longest. The one who never raised his voice because he never had to. You're slipping, Laura said hoarsely. You used to wait longer. He chuckled. And you used to obey faster. Outside the building, Jean Park felt the silence, like a physical blow. The calm was dead. Get eyes on every floor, he snapped.
Now.
Miho's voice shook in his ear. We're blocked. Signals are jammed. Jean clenched his fists so hard his knuckles burned. Then we go in. Inside, Laura shifted her shoulders subtly, testing the restraints. Too tight. Too deliberate. They wanted her awake. Present. You caused instability, the man continued, pacing. You made noise. You dragged civilians and syndicates into something that was meant to stay clean. Laura lifted her head. You came in person. That wasn't clean. A pause. A flicker of irritation. Careful, he warned. No, she said. You be careful. You don't show up unless you're losing control. Silence stretched. Then a smile she could hear. You always did see too much. Before we go any further, can I ask you something? Have you ever been trapped in a situation where you knew fighting back too soon would cost you everything? Comment below if that hits close. And hit like if you're still here, because Laura's next move isn't physical. It's psychological. You're wondering why we didn't kill you, the man said. Why not end the problem? Laura met his gaze. Because you still want something from me. He stopped pacing. Say it. You want to know if I broke, she said. If I still think like you taught me. He nodded slowly. Do you? Laura smiled faintly.
A mistake.
A calculated one. Enough to know you're bluffing. His expression hardened. Explain. You hit Jin's operations. You leaked rumors. You isolated me. But you didn't touch him directly. Her voice steadied as her mind sharpened. You're afraid of escalation. Of exposure. A hand struck her across the face. The impact snapped her head sideways, blood blooming in her mouth. You don't get to analyze us anymore, he said coldly. Laura swallowed, then looked back up. You just proved my point. Outside, Jin's men breached the lower floors.
Silent.
Efficient. But too slow. Laura, Jean muttered, eyes scanning the skeletal building. Hold on. Inside, the man crouched in front of her. You should have stayed gone. You taught me to disappear, Laura replied. You just never expected me to come back on my own terms. He stood. You think Park will save you? Laura's eyes flicked up. I think you misjudged him. A distant sound echoed through the building.
Gunfire. Shouting.
The man turned sharply. What did you do? Laura exhaled. I stalled. Before we continue, quick question. If you were in Jin's position right now, would you storm in blind or pull back and rethink everything? Tell me in the comments. The room erupted into motion. Orders barked. Footsteps pounded. The man drew a weapon and grabbed Laura by the hair, forcing her upright. You're not worth this, he hissed. Laura leaned close, bloodied but smiling. You came anyway. The door burst open. Jean didn't shout. He didn't hesitate. He moved. The next moments blurred into sound and motion. Laura felt the grip on her hair loosen, then disappear. Her chair tipped, hit the floor hard. Pain flared, then hands were on her, cutting restraints. Laura, Jean said urgently. She focused on his face. Grounded herself there. You're late. His jaw tightened. I'm here. Gunfire echoed closer. Miho shouted something she couldn't make out. Jean hauled her up, arm around her shoulders. Can you move? Yes, she lied. They ran. Down unfinished stairs. Through concrete dust and chaos. Laura leaned into Jean more than she wanted to, vision swimming now that adrenaline surged. They burst into night air as sirens wailed in the distance. Jean shoved her into the car and slid in after her, door slamming shut as Miho peeled away. Only when the building disappeared behind them did Jean finally speak. You knew they'd take you, he said quietly. Yes. And you let it happen. Yes. He turned to her, anger and fear warring in his eyes. You could have died. Laura met his gaze. They won't kill me. Not yet. That's not comforting. It's leverage. Silence filled the car, broken only by sirens fading. Jean finally exhaled. They crossed a line. Laura nodded. So did you. He frowned. What does that mean? You came for me, she said. Not your territory. Not your reputation. Me. Jean didn't look away. Don't make it something it isn't. Laura smiled weakly. Too late. Do you think Jean just became a target? Or did he just choose a side? Drop your answer in the comments. Like the video if you're still with us and subscribe. Jean didn't let anyone touch her for the first 10 minutes. Not the medics. Not Miho. Not the men who kept glancing at the blood on Laura's collar and then quickly looking away. She sat on the edge of the bed in a back room of the warehouse, shoulders hunched slightly, jaw tight, eyes distant. Shock hadn't taken her. It never did. What hit Laura later was always quieter, heavier. You should lie down, Jean said. I will, she replied. In a minute. That minute stretched. Miho broke the silence first. They're spinning it already. Rumors. Claims you orchestrated the whole thing. Laura gave a short breath that might have been a laugh. Of course they are. Jean turned to Miho. Clear the room. Miho hesitated. Jean.
Now.
When they were alone, Jean finally spoke again. You planned that. Laura didn't deny it. I planned the capture. Not the dosage. You let them drug you. Yes. You let them put hands on you. Laura looked up then. Her eyes were sharp despite the bruising. And because of that, you now know exactly how far they're willing to go. Jin's voice dropped. I didn't need proof. You did, she said gently. You just didn't want it. Silence sat between them. Then Jean said the thing he hadn't let himself think until now. They didn't just cross a line tonight, he said. They declared you property. Laura nodded. And you declared yourself complicit the moment you came for me. Jean inhaled slowly. You used me. Yes, she said without flinching. And I trusted you. That stopped him. She continued, quieter now. I needed to know which way you'd turn when it stopped being about business. Jean watched her for a long moment. Then he nodded once. And you didn't hesitate.
He looked away.
That might have been a mistake. Laura shook her head.
No.
That was your choice. Outside, the warehouse buzzed with activity. Men repositioning. Phones ringing. Borders shifting again. The fallout had already begun. By morning, 3 of Jin's secondary allies had pulled out. Quietly.
No confrontation.
Just distance. Fear had teeth. They're bleeding us slowly, Miho said. And now they're whispering that Laura is the reason. Laura listened from the doorway. Say it, she said. Miho turned. They're asking if she's worth it. Laura nodded. Fair question. Jean slammed his hand on the table. Enough. Everyone froze. He stood, eyes sweeping the room. This ends today. One way or another. Laura stepped forward. If you do that, people die. Jean met her gaze. They already are. She held his stare, searching for hesitation. There was none. Before we continue, can I ask you something? If standing beside someone meant losing everything you built, would you still do it? Comment your answer. And if you're still here, hit like, because this is the point where there's no clean way out. Laura took a breath. Then we stop reacting. Jean crossed his arms.
I'm listening.
They don't expect me to disappear, she said. They expect escalation. So we deny them both. Miho frowned. What does that look like? Laura's eyes hardened. Exposure. The word landed like a dropped weapon. You said they clean operations, Jean said.
No witnesses. No trials.
They still keep records, Laura replied. They're arrogant. They think no one survives long enough to connect the dots. She reached into her jacket and pulled out a small device.
Scarred. Old.
I took this when I left, she said. It's not enough on its own, but paired with your reach. Jean understood instantly. We burn them publicly. Yes, Laura said. And once that starts, they'll panic. And panic makes them sloppy, Miho added. Laura nodded. Exactly. The plan moved fast after that. Too fast to second guess. Files transferred.
Contact activated.
Quiet messages sent to people who hated the handlers but had never dared say it out loud. By evening, something shifted online. Not headlines yet. Whispers. Screenshots. Patterns. Someone, somewhere, recognized the shape of the story forming.
They're scrambling, Miho said.
Pulling assets. Locking channels. Laura leaned back against the wall, exhaustion finally breaking through. Good. Jean watched her closely. You're not done. No, she admitted. Neither are they. A message buzzed on Laura's phone. One word. Enough. She stared at it, then deleted it. They're afraid, Jean said. Yes, she replied. And dangerous. He stepped closer. You can still walk away after this. Laura looked up at him. You know I won't. Jean nodded. Then neither will I. That was it. No speech.
No promise.
Just alignment. Outside, the city moved on. People went to work, ate dinner,
Slept.
unaware that a system built on silence had just been dragged into the light. Laura closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, there was no doubt left in them. This isn't about revenge, she said. It's about ending it. Jean placed a hand on the table. Then we finish it. The city didn't announce the end of the war. It never does. There were no sirens that morning. No breaking headlines. No frantic calls stacking on top of each other. Just stillness. The kind that feels wrong when you've lived inside chaos for too long. Laura noticed it first. She stood by the warehouse window, watching traffic move the way it always had, people laughing, arguing, living as if nothing had come within inches of tearing the city apart. They're gone, she said quietly. Jean looked up from his phone. He had been waiting for another alert. Another warning. Something. But the screen stayed calm. Miho checked his own device again, then slowly nodded. All channels are dark. Every proxy account just vanished. Shell companies dissolved overnight. Jean frowned. They don't retreat. They don't, Laura agreed. They erase themselves. She leaned her forehead against the glass, eyes closing for a second. For the first time since the restaurant, her shoulders dropped. Not in relief. In release. It had finally ended. The exposure hadn't come like a bomb. It never does when you're dealing with systems built on silence. It came like rot revealed. Financial trails too clean to be coincidence. Names that appeared across unrelated operations. Patterns journalists couldn't ignore once someone showed them where to look. By afternoon, the man who trained Laura no longer existed on paper. By nightfall, the network that owned her past had folded in on itself. They chose survival, Miho said, over revenge. Laura opened her eyes. They always do. Jean studied her face.
Bruised.
Tired. Still standing. You knew this would work, he said. I hoped, she replied. That's different. Silence stretched between them. Not tense. Reflective. Before we go any further, can I ask you one last question? Have you ever stayed in a fight not because you wanted to win, but because walking away felt like losing yourself? Comment below. And if this story carried you here, hit like before the ending settles. The call came just before sunset. Laura looked at the number, then answered without stepping away from the room. You've made your point, the voice said.
No, Laura replied calmly.
I ended it. A long pause followed. Longer than before. The kind that told her the man on the other end was older now. Tired. Calculating losses instead of victories. You could have disappeared, he said. I tried, Laura answered. You followed. Another silence. Then a sigh. You were always difficult. Laura smiled faintly. Not with pride. With understanding. You taught me that. We will not contact you again, the voice said. You leave Korea. You take your silence with you. Laura glanced at Jean. He shook his head once.
No, she said.
You dismantle what's left. You burn every remaining file. And you forget my name. A sharp breath on the other end. You don't get to dictate. I already did, Laura said gently. Check your systems. The line went dead. They waited. 10 seconds. Then Miho's phone buzzed. He read once, then again, disbelief flickering across his face. They're purging everything, he said. Internal wipe.
No backups.
Jean exhaled slowly, like a man who had been holding his breath for weeks. It's over, he said. Laura didn't answer immediately. She walked to the center of the room and sat on the floor, back against the wall. Her hands finally trembled. Just a little. Not fear. Aftershock. Jean noticed. He didn't say anything. He sat across from her instead. Close enough that she wasn't alone. Far enough that she didn't feel cornered. You don't have to stay, he said quietly. Laura looked up. Neither do you. He considered that. I built my life on knowing who my enemies were. And now, she asked, now I know who stood between me and death. That landed heavier than either of them expected. The city outside moved on. Neon lights flickered to life. Traffic thickened. People made dinner plans.
Laughed. Loved.
Completely unaware of how close something irreversible had come to touching them. Laura stood. I'm leaving, she said. Jean nodded. I figured. I don't know where, she continued. Somewhere small. Quiet. He hesitated. If you ever need. She shook her head gently. I won't. Then, after a beat. But thank you for not turning away. Jean met her eyes. Thank you for not letting me. They didn't hug. They didn't promise anything. Some connections don't need ceremony. Laura walked out as the city lights fully came on. Jean watched from the window until she disappeared into the crowd. Just another woman moving through Korea, finally unmarked. Miho stepped beside him. Do you think she'll be okay? Jean answered without hesitation. She already is. And somewhere between violence, choice, and courage, Laura Sam became something she had never been allowed to be before. Not a weapon. Not an asset. Not a secret. Just free. Before you leave, if this story held you until the very end, do 3 things for me. Like the video. Subscribe to the channel. And tell me in the comments. Do you think Laura found peace? Or simply learned how to live with her scars? Because some stories don't end loudly. They end honestly.